175th session of the Literary and Scientific Society. Tonight's debate is this House believes achieving net zero is not worth the cost. But before we get into the order of business, I'd like to raise a few things to the House about behaviour and the rules during and after debates. It's important first of all to remember our standing orders, and I've got a couple of copies here, so oh yeah. They're also readily available online on our website as well. So I'd like to because we not only are going to read through some relevant standing orders today, but we're also looking to amend the standing order, so hooray! You only usually get this at AGM, so it's very exciting. We love constitutional business. Okay, so section 3A of the standing orders. Members of the House should refrain from swearing or using obscene language when speaking before the House, including in private members' business and during questions. Section 3A, Part 1. The President shall have the right to fine members of the Society for breaking this rule. Section 3A, Part 2. The ordinary fine shall be 1 bottle of port wine presented to the President in private members' business at the next meeting. Section 3B. Members must not use language which is racist, homophobic, sectarian or sexist, or which is obviously likely to cause offence to a certain group. This includes the use of slurs. Section 3C, direct attacks against other members of the House are forbidden. Section 3D, party and religious polemic is forbidden during meetings except where the motion requires it or where the chair waives this rule. And Section 3E, members should not be excessively drunk during meetings. And it's Section 3E. Okay. It's Section 3E that we are looking to amend. So this is the proposed amendment.
Section 3D.
Okay. Members should not be excessively drunk during meetings, and alcohol must not be bought or consumed at any meeting unless members are bringing a single bottle of port wine to be presented to the President as part of a fine. Before I will open up to the House in a minute, I do recognise that the Council have maybe been some offenders at drinking during debates in the past. However, we do recognise that the culture around debates should change. This is meant to be a place where there's self-control, it's an academic conversation, and it's not, you're not meant to drink at it. And also, I do not drink the port, I give it away, I don't like port, so this is not just to benefit me. Does the House or anyone on Council have anything to say about this? Good to
So I think we agreed that this should change pending a vote on the House. Also because it's strictly against the university's rules to drink on the university grounds unless the alcohol has been bought from the university as part of a catering deal with the society, which we will not be making with that. I think the main thing is this university in the last session seemed to be looking for any reason to kick us out of this room and have us return to a shitty lecture theatre that none of us want to go back to. So I think it's very important that we make sure that we have a firm line. Drinking at debates and bringing alcohol should not be allowed. No alcohol should be consumed in the university, and we just wouldn't want the SU or the university to catch any of our members doing that and to come down hard on the society, because at the minute it looks like they're looking for a reason to do that.
Anyone else on this? Jack?
Where does the university get us having fun?
Well, I also hate you having fun, so please members. Jonathan?
Should the port wine be a swear word or just if you swear?
It's just per debate. So, yeah. I mean, we could make the fines bigger. No, we're actually not going to do it. And is there anyone else on this? Okay, Peter.
I'd like to make an amendment to the rule. I think the port wine isn't really a good suggestion. I think we need to change port wine with pound of flesh.
The port wine is tradition, so I don't think so. Is that everyone on this, or can we vote to amend this standing order? So if you would like to vote to amend this standing order, Section 3, Part E of Literific standing orders, please raise your hand now.
Don't be so excited, I mean, I've one, so personal doesn't afraid.
You already know.
Okay.
Democracy, yeah.
Okay. And if you would like to vote against amending this standing order, please raise your hand. 1. No, shouldn't. 1, 3, 2. Is your hand? No. It's just 3. Yeah. And if you'd like to abstain, please raise your hand now. Just 1. 2, yeah. Could we have the results, please, Brad?
Yeah, it's a really exciting question of amending the Constitution no one's read. 38 votes for the proposition, 3 losers, 2 voters for the Alliance Party. That's by, as I would say, a West Belfast margin.
Brilliant. So that is that amended. It will be added to the standing orders in as soon as possible. And lastly, on the same sort of vein, I want everyone in the room to remember 2 things. The first one is, at no stage of the debate should you attack a speaker purely based on their background and circumstances in life. This is a forum for intellectual debate, and the arguments brought up within the framework of that debate are the only thing that should be discussed. Remember that some people are debating against their own beliefs and opinions, and because they are drafted in last minute, or because it's what they like to do. I know myself, I've debated on many things that I don't agree with, because it's a debate, and also just because you debate with someone doesn't mean that you know everything about their circumstances in life. This is, at the end of the day, a debate society where people want to learn to improve their skills, and if you criticise people on their backgrounds, it limits your ability as a debater and takes away the enjoyment of it from everyone else. So please do not attack a speaker based on their background. And number 2, if you have to leave the room, please do it quietly between debates, and remember, sound travels, so don't talk very loudly outside. And now we will move on to council announcements, finally. So do we have any council announcements? I'll go to Sam first.
Well, no, I'm last. Go to Todd first.
Okay, Tom.
So the Society has a debate in Dublin next week with the Phil in Dublin, like we did last year. Many of you were there. The Society is putting on a bus which is free for all Society members and £5 for non-members. It will leave keys promptly at 3:30 out of the front of the Lanyon gates. We're not sure what time we'll arrive back yet at, but it would envisage it would be after midnight probably. So if you intend on coming, please factor that into your plans. And we only have limited spaces, so it is first come first served, and you should sign up going to the Literific Instagram. It's at QUB Literific, clicking on the link tree and then going through to the form. And if you are not a paid up member, you can still sign up and then purchase your membership to the Society after that, and I'll check on the records and everything. But please do that, because we have a considerable amount of sign-ups already, so there are only limited spaces left.
Do we have any other council announcements?
I believe a congratulations in order indeed to you, Madam President, and to the members of the Society that have spoken in the Irish Times and are currently speaking in the Irish Times. Currently, so far, we've managed to have a great success so far, and possibly more to come in the next coming days. Round of applause all round, please, in order. One more piece of information. The following weekend, during the 18th and 19th, there is the UCD IV. We are currently looking for speakers to come to this competition, and I believe grant is provided during it.
Yeah.
So those who are looking to take part in the format of debate that is slightly different to this, which is much more based around information rather than rhetoric, please speak to me, and we'll be able to hopefully get you on.
Brilliant. And Sam.
Yes, so this time of year, well, I should have done earlier, but my bad. I have to ratify the charity for this year. This year, the council has chosen a charity called Bocomo NI, which helps women, refugees, and asylum seekers. And we just need to send the vote to the House, I believe, to ratify that. Pretty much that'll be the where all the money's going for all future socials, you know, pub nights, county nights, that sort of stuff. So yeah,
If we would like for the Society's charity to be Bocomo, please raise.
Seconded.
Oh yes.
oh yes, sir.
Yeah, please raise your hand now. Yeah, I mean, most hands are raised anyway, so yeah, that's this year's charity, and I believe that's all the council announcements. So I'd like to welcome James Orchin up to read the minutes.
About 2 weeks ago, I fell through a ceiling. Unfortunately, I am still here, else I have to do the minutes tonight. And I actually haven't read these, so I have no idea what's in it, so thanks, Grant. On the 2nd of November 2023, a week ago, if you can think, Queen's University Belfast City Literary and Scientific Society convened for the 7th Ordinary Meeting of the 107th. Stop it, please. Session. For the motion, this House regrets the fall of the USSR. As usual, the meeting began with announcements. Can somebody kick him in the groin, please?
I just keep imagining like paparazzi by Lady Gaga.
Well, I don't know that song. Anyways, following a reading of the minutes, they were voted on passing unanimously. The meeting moved to private members' business. Stop it. Sir Keir Starmer firstly raised the evolution in human height over the past 2 millennia and suggested that we could now all be able to beat Alexander the Great in a fist fight. The minor point there being that he has been dead for over 2,000 years, so, that would be quite easy. Well, from some of us, Ciara. The Mother of the House, Ciara Swale, raised the issue of Taylor Swift's re-recording of her albums and the success of her most recent, quote, monstrosity, 1989, Taylor's version, not my words. Probably are, though. Thirdly, Ryan Kilgore suggested that all meetings begin with someone greeting members' debates dressed with a pumpkin on their head. I will obviously note that there is tinfoil in that, so he is obviously representing the Green Party here tonight. As you said, just like, quote, the shenanigans that were occurring across there, so I think they were recording some sort of film or student film, or I don't really know. Anyways, finally, Ronnie Lynch raised the question of prosecution of the Somerset Gimp, and at this point, Rory experienced his awakening, and he hasn't been able to get to sleep ever since. The President's questions then sadly took place. Ryan Kilgore asked the President to lead the House in a cheerful rendition of Happy Birthday to celebrate the 120th birthday of the country of Panama. This was ignored. Madam President responded positively to Rory McSmartin's request to endorse the actions of the Somerset Gimp. Mr. Secretary James Orchin asked to be put out of his misery and not to be made Secretary again. This was ignored, sadly. Vote in prior opinion then took place with 10 votes in the prop, 17 for the op, and 6 abstentions. Therefore, the House did not regret the fall of the USSR like normal people. Firstly, on the proposition was Cormac McSparren, who raised the importance of communism as a tool for challenging the established authority. He also pointed out that the Western opposition to the USSR had been hypocritical due to the support of regimes such as apartheid South Africa, and Western aggression towards the USSR had meant that communism had never been able to properly thrive. And then he went on something about Stalinism. I'm not really sure what was going on there. First on the proposition was Jonathan Massey. He provided an interesting PowerPoint presentation of himself as a quote-unquote gallant crusader against the evil of communism. He stressed that a failure of Soviet leaders to meet basic needs of their population, or indeed to actually be alive for more than about a year or two, didn't really help the situation, and then he concluded by saying the Soviet economy was doomed to collapse. Second on the proposition was Eli McBrady, making their maiden speech. They made a brave effort to defend the living conditions in Soviet states, saying that homelessness was not an issue and the quality of housing was irrelevant, so long as the population were nourished and sheltered. Additionally, it was confirmed that the USSR acted as an effective check on American imperialism, and then didn't really mention anything else there. Anyways, the second speaker in the opposition was her. Her speech focused on the methodological errors made by the proposition, and then we went on about a 5-minute go of, what does it mean for a regrets motion? I don't know. No, you're wrong. You're wrong. Oh, shut up, Mr. President Emeritus. Now, anyways, blah, blah, blah. The Soviet Union was the author of its own collapse, according to her, and its ineffective half measures in the economy piggybacked on American ideals to give the impression of innovation. She concluded by comparing Soviet decline as a limping dog, begging to be put out of its misery after getting hit by a car. The final speaker.
Mr. Secretary.
I can't drive well. That's fine. Anyways, the final speaker for the proposition was Tiernan Tracy, making his maiden speech. It was quote-unquote a highly original speech, end quote. Tiernan made the point that the fall of the USSR had meant that international politics had been changed, and then he kept talking about the 11th of September. I'm not sure what's so interesting about my grandparents' wedding anniversary date. They've been married for 58 years, and long may it continue, but I'm not sure why that merited so much discussion. Maybe ask him afterwards, I don't know. Rounding out the debate was Ryan Kilgore as the final opposition speaker, making his maiden speech, and my God, there are a lot of them. He described the Soviet economics and politics as contributing to the USSR being an awful place to live. He then thought about what is the inevitability of the death of the USSR, and then referred to one of the members of the proposition as, quote, a little Stalinist. Which, to be fair, actually he's not little. Questions were heard from Mr. Secretary me, President Emeritus Daniel McCormick, sadly, Sam Hazlitt, Adam Mandeville, and Sir Keir Starmer. I didn't write this, I should say. Following the debate and questions from the House, the vote and speaker ability took place. There were 7 votes for the proposition, 20 for the opposition, and 6 abstentions. So there was, I think, a quorum of people at that point. So the opposition had it. May I take the minutes as read? Aye.
Now we move on to private members' business, where you can discuss anything that you saw in the news this week, or you just want to race to the House. And I'll go to Ryan first.
In full knowledge of the fact that I arrived here tonight wearing a pumpkin on my head, I would like to express some concern that many serious motions in the society are being overcome by what I could only refer to as joke speeches, where it's undermining people who have prepared valid points with academic rigor, and ultimately is disappointing people who come to the society to try and see that. So with that in mind, I'd like to raise a motion to condemn people who come and treat serious topics as a joke, and ultimately just use their speech to try and get a laugh rather than contributing to the discussion.
Excellent. All right, well, another motion, okay. If you would like to condemn joke speeches, please raise your hand now.
Can I make a point about this?
Yes.
Oh, actually, yeah, we can send it to the House first.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, well, yeah, I do agree that, like, especially last week, there were some speeches that very clearly were, like, sort of mainly jokes, but I think that we should make sure to differentiate from speeches with some humour added to it, but still talking about the point as opposed to just pure jokes. We need to differentiate because we can't just become humorless.
Kira, did you have something?
Yeah, basically second that. Like, for example, humor can actually be used in a very efficient way. Like for example, our times you are encouraged to use humor, but if you are funny, absolutely do that. I am not funny. I'm a serious speaker. I know my strength, and it is not comedy. But what I would like to recommend to people who want to have a bit of a laugh, like a fantastic way to give a speech that's a bit of a laugh but actually still be relevant is like make the joke part of your argument. Make the joke at least have some point and merit to it, instead of I sure this is a meme, you know, and that means you can actually put your point across. It's also a very good way of, if you mock the other side's points, by the way, their points, not themselves, it can also be used as a very effective method. So yeah, use humour, just don't do the entire speech like that.
Anyone else on this? Well, I guess then it's not really a motion to
I just very quickly point out that this is something the Council has discussed pretty urgently after the last few debates. I think the general consensus is that in debates like this and debates that you can see sort of on the term card, it is expected that serious speeches are delivered. That is not the Council saying no to any jokes, but completely unserious speeches I don't think is something that we want to see. And next term, with the agreement of the internal convener, I believe it is you that have said that we will include specific joke speeches on the term card for those who want to just have that sort of debate. I think it's important to set out that difference.
Son.
Yeah, just with that in mind, like more than I stated, I've been told that if Michael Mackay doesn't turn up, I'm going to have to be speaking, and given that I don't know a single thing about this topic, will the House perhaps excuse me if I take the mic ever so slightly, because I have to clue what I'm talking about?
Oh, okay.
If you want to.
Let Max have some practice.
Is anybody else on just like this topic of kind of joke speeches versus like speeches that use humour, I guess? I'll go to Q.
Just one question I'd be asking is, well, I think they should apply to speeches. What about private members' business? Like, are we allowed to sort of bring up like humorous topics?
Yeah.
Good, because then I can bring up mine later.
I would just say I think the general thing is for everyone in this room in speeches going forward is everything is good until you, well, in moderation. Like sometimes it's good to just have a bit of a laugh or a joke point, like every now and again. But if your whole speech is haha, funny, random, I'm really not taking this seriously at all, and people have taken the time out of their day for close to like 2 hours to listen to you spend 7 minutes just being a twat, really. Just think about it, realistically.
Anyone else? Well, I don't really think we need a vote on it. I think people are already kind of thinking that way. So if we want to move on to another piece of private members' business.
I'd like to raise the issue of the King's speech, during which he discusses low quality university degrees. I seem to find this a rather arbitrary definition, particularly regarding the status of students. I wouldn't dare to suggest that our students, intolerable as I may find them, to be undergoing a poor quality education. University, as we all know, is exactly what you make of it, and therefore suggests that the King, or indeed the government, should perhaps put forward a clarification.
I'll go to the grant first.
I would broadly agree with Fenton's point there. I think this notion that certain subjects are less worthy of attention. I would say this, not only student, if I was doing a history and French degree purely for job prospects, I'd probably end up working probably nothing related to that degree. Yeah.
PwC.
But the thing is, though, I do think there's a slightly separate point of how, if people critique the overall ecosystem of higher education and what people inevitably get into debt for, I do think that there's this kind of slight sensitivity around this, and that I think a lot of people don't really always necessarily want to acknowledge, which is vocational education training. There is such an emphasis culturally through schools that you have to go to university. It's the step you have to do in your life. You'll miss out if you don't. And when people often critique the price of higher education, simple fact is more people have, since tuition fees have been a thing, more people have went to university from lower socioeconomic strata. Back when university was free, it was largely constrained to a more limited slice of the population. I'm only the second person in my family to go to university, right? So I can attest to that personally. And I would say that there doesn't need a wider conversation around if higher education, university level education, I'm doing a degree for 3 or 4 years and paying that, as imperfect as the system is that worth it? Rather than degrading individual disciplines or subjects or whatever.
Anyone on this? Go to Max.
I just want to say is that I think this, quite like the first speaker said, it's very arbitrary. The largest amount of degree graduates are from business degrees or law degrees. Very few are doing the degrees that Rishi Sunak is talking about. And I wholeheartedly agree with the speaker before me. More effort needs to be put into vocational schools and alternative education pathways, because I know quite a few people who would have succeeded much better than they have in the current academic system just because they weren't given the option. And I think it's just testament to the King's speech as a whole bunch of absolute nothing. It was just basically Rishi Sunak going, oh guys, everything's grand, the government's doing everything possible, as the BBC News headline at the bottom is just saying, NHS burning down, Rishi Sunak announced plans to continue as usual. So I think that alone is just a estimate to the fact that the Conservative government as it stands just doesn't have ideas.
Anyone else on this, Ryan?
If they're going to start eliminating nonsense degrees, may I suggest PE at Oxford so that we can get rid of the scourge of British politics?
I'll go back to Grant.
Just like about the King's Speech more generally. This probably comes as no surprise to anyone who knows how right-wing I am. I did find there were some things of merit in it. I do think the whole thing was a bit, from a political point of view, it was an example of a government out of ideas. Rishi Sunak trying to present himself as a change candidate, but is the successor of 13 years of Conservative government. So I see that. I do think there's some worthwhile stuff that was in it in relation to the broader message around, I think, where the main parties in British politics are headed. That people, I stood up in the speech and Stormont criticised Keir Starmer, but at the same time, I do think there's a broad view of priorities shared across the parties. And I did find some of the measures in the King's speech to be a good frame for what should be done, but politically it's wrong messenger, wrong party.
Kira?
Also, like, what I will say as well is that you'd be surprised the amount of skills you learn from nonsense degrees. So, for example, for those of you who don't know, I was a French and English student. I studied for approximately 4 years, and I worked in France and several things like that as well. And I actually found out that I had a skill that very few people of the kind of, how do I put this, more scientific backgrounds and the more STEM? Yeah, STEM kind of deal. Where two of my friends had to write an essay. And my God, did they struggle. They then went to me and went, please can you make my essay make sense? And I then had to proofread the entire thing, and I've done that so many times now that you kind of, and also in my current job, for those of you who don't know, I work for banks. I screen clients on behalf of banks. And even at that, like, if you have clients who are French, they get me in to read the documents because no one else can. And also, I, from my degree, learned that I'm very good at researching and I can consume vast amounts of information in very short periods of time. So what I will say is, like, I think it's very dangerous to go nonsense degrees when in fact you can learn skills from them. And the second thing is, the harsh reality is that for most jobs nowadays you need a degree. They don't care what degree you have, they just want a degree. Like, for example, when I was going for jobs, minimum was a 2-1 in any degree. And that was just the way it is. So it would be great if we could just go, we don't need university whatsoever, it's a big load of hoo-ha. And with that, I absolutely agree vocation needs to be looked into. But the problem is, our system is so based on going to university that if you want to just go into a job without having a degree, good luck to you. And that's the issue as well, where it's an expectation that you need that piece of paper to say that you can do what you do. Like, literally, I had a friend who was fluent in several coding languages, had never been to university in his life, was very, very, very skilled at what he did, and he literally went to do a computer science degree where he was learning stuff he had learned at the age of 14, just to say that he had a piece of paper that said that he could do it. And that's an issue as well.
Do we have another piece of private members' business?
Yeah.
Okay,
so horror movies, skeletons.
Yay!
Okay, skeletons. They're really not scary. Why do horror movies keep having skeletons? Skeletons are they're so funny. Like, the way they run and the way they move, they just look really goofy. Like they've got a bone to pick with you, for God's sake. How is anybody meant to see skeletons as anything but funny? I'm sorry, they're not scary. I think we should just eradicate them from horror movies. They're funny.
I'm gonna go to Jonathan.
Skeletons aren't just scary, they're spooky and scary.
Like, I'm 6 years ago, I went with his older brother.
No. I just thought you were about to mention.
To see a wonderful masterpiece film, the remake of the Mummy. We were the only two people in the film theatre, and it was the funniest thing that I've seen. Just for the point of skeletons, there's a scene where Tom Cruise inadvertently revives long-buried Crusader knights who were buried in London sewers or something. But there's zombie skeletons and also Crusader knights. And there's a scene where he's
which order are they in?
and they're using after him. It's the funniest CGI. I would recommend anybody here who's feeling down and sad watch that. It's the greatest thing in the world.
Do we have anyone else on skeletons? Okay, I'll take you, then I'll take Evie, and then we'll move on because it's almost time.
Answer zombies. The true most terrible thing about skeletons is probably the disease. I'm not gonna lie, like if something comes down from the graves, it's gonna be like giving them typhus and stuff. That's terrifying.
Evie?
I'm going to agree with Kier's motion on the condition that he puts up equal consideration for what he's asking for. If you're asking for the abolition of skeletons in horror movies, could we abolish your skeleton?
Yeah.
Brilliant. And now we'll move on to President's Questions, where you have 5 minutes to ask me anything you want, as long as it's not political.
President.
I've got to think of this.
Further to Pamela's happy birthday celebrations, what do you think of the recent shooting of a Panamanian man shot and fired at the protesters in the Panama Canal? What's your view?
Is that political though? That's
No,
not
that is
actually
political.
I think that is. That's slightly political.
I mean,
Hey, you have to consider that.
Just condemn
what Panama
Condemn
was.
I just want you to condemn Panama, really.
I have to go Panama all day.
I'm not going to condemn Canada. Yeah, I'll condemn
Canada.
violence, but not Panama. Okay, I'll go to Max.
Madam President, as we are well aware, you are doing a creative writing degree. I was wondering, what is your favourite novel or piece of literature?
Oh, well, I have two. I have Wuthering Heights and Flowers for Algernon. But, yeah.
I don't think they're one of those.
Which one?
It's me.
That's not the book. That's the song. No.
Jason's one has just been shattered.
Here.
What's your favorite video game?
Oh, for God's sake.
Video games are good.
Skyrim, maybe. Skyrim, because it's the only one I actually ever played. I'll go to Noah.
Do you agree with Ciala Brockman being
That is so political. No.
What was that? This Skyrim.
I'll go to you. Or could you sit down to this?
What's your opinion on the last Beatles song?
Oh, yes. Oh.
I mean,
Name for the minute.
Good question.
It's Ben Holmes.
Oh, thank you.
I didn't really like the song itself. It was kind of boring. But I do know that, wasn't it Peter Jackson who made it, which makes me think of Lord of the Rings. Yeah. So, he only made the video. I
Yeah,
thought
he
made
didn't
the
do the
song.
song. No.
Oh, it doesn't matter then. Anyway.
What's this I hear about Little Redwood happening again? Where's Rory? Rory! Come back. Come here, Rory.
Rory, you're needed.
No one wants to know about your things you do in your bedroom.
Yeah, the Literific imp has fled the room, sadly. Are there any other questions? Oh gosh. I'll go to Eddie.
Would Madam President agree with me that the unfortunate delay of us obtaining this room due to the whichever not naming names for society, would they agree that this is a casus belli for invading the entire country?
I would say that it definitely was a shock when I walked into this room and I did not find it empty, and instead I heard a lecture and then I slowly walked out of the room without saying a word. And so do we know it was the French? Because somebody just said
it. Spanish Civil War workshop.
Does it really matter if it was the French or not?
I
side of the Pyrenees.
I do say with absolute authority, having lived in France for the last year, it was the French.
Okay, well then, we'll see. We'll see strategies to invade someday. I don't know what they was. Okay.
Given that when the Twin Towers were felled by Iraq, would it not be justifiable, given that it was the Spanish society, to similarly invade the French, even though they have no clear connection?
And with that, no. And with that, I think we'll move on to the vote of prior opinion. Guys, we'll move on to the vote of prior opinion. So, if you side with the proposition tonight and you do believe that achieving net zero is not worth the cost, please raise your hand now.
Who likes skating in their house? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think the
And if you side with the opposition, you do believe that achieving net zero is worth the cost, please raise your hand now.
Oh, wow.
I lost myself.
Just go.
We're doing an average.
25. Okay, and if you'd like to, and if you'd like to abstain on the motion, please raise your hand now.
Why are you both abstaining?
I already counted your vote.
No, we're abstaining.
But I counted.
You can't count it up.
What'd you get? I'm in coalition with
Okay. Mr. Secretary, could you please read the vote on prior opinion?
Fudge cakes.
Well, so, 14 people like having heating on in the room and lights. 25 people say they don't like it, they probably do use it. 8 people really don't want to be in this room, Sam. So, the opposition has it.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, before we move, I'd like to read some more rules. Each speech is 7 minutes long. First and last minute are protected time, which will be signalled by the bell down there, meaning that you can only POI people in the middle 5 minutes. To POI, raise your hand and say point of information on that point, or POI. Please keep your POIs to 10 seconds and no barracking, meaning wait at least 15 seconds after giving a POI to give another one. Also very importantly, no back and forth. Lastly, no swearing. And with that, I would like to welcome Jack Steele up to open the proposition.
Before I begin with the proposition, I'd like to give thanks to the Literific for offering me the opportunity to make my maiden speech. The world has been before subject to many preposterous proposals on the basis of climate alarmism. In the 1960s, there were Malthusian predictions about mass starvation. Shortly after that, the Club of Rome, which concerningly suggested that the world would fall short of all natural resources and economic production would grind to a halt. Then in the 1970s, scientists told us that there was going to be another ice age in which global cooling was happening at an alarming rate. And the latest campaign of extremism, net zero, as noble as it may be, abandons all reason and humanity, as well as consigning economic sanity to the dustbin. Net zero is not worth the cost because the economic burdens will manacle us to a continued state of depravity. A recent report by former Chief Scientific Advisor, Professor Michael Kelly, reported that the cost of achieving net zero in the UK by 2050 sits comfortably within the remit of £3 trillion.
On that point?
No, thank you. It would, he asserted, require a workforce comparable in size to the NHS and which would need to be sustained for a total of 30 years, including doubling the number of present electrical engineers, as well as that, the bill for the procurement of specialist materials which would be needed to accommodate the renewable energy. The fact of the matter is, switching to a reliance upon renewable energies to facilitate net zero is simply not economically viable. The government energy bill, which proposed a grant of £5,000 to install heat pumps in the house, it somewhat pales into insignificance when you look at the technicalities being that 5k grant is only available to 90,000 homes. There's 27 million homes in the United Kingdom. Heat pumps are grotesquely expensive and cost between 10 and 20,000 depending on the size of the house. And if I move on to the point on electric vehicles, author Alan Clark reported that 40% of the electricity used to manufacture vehicles comes from fossil fuels. That doesn't seem very green. Yes.
While indeed that is true, however, it is still mitigating the amount of fuel that is burnt. It requires, on the whole, in terms of calories, less heat energy to be produced to form the electricity in order to power vehicles as opposed to merely fueling the car.
Well, on that point, I seem to have something to follow that up, which is we know the extracting of the specialist minerals required for electric vehicles produces between 40 and 50% more carbon emissions than producing standard automobiles. Regarding wind power, put simply, the intermittency is the supreme fallacy upon which it rests. The wind does not always blow and the sun does not always shine, and it's outrageous that anyone would propose the desecration of our natural environment by installing at 10 billion per each wind turbines across the countryside. It is ludicrous, utterly ludicrous. By the way, the 10 billion would of course come at the taxpayers' expense, not those who are being paid £1,000 a day like David Cameron's dad was to have the wind turbines on their land. Farming is responsible for only about 10% of total greenhouse emissions, yet some would rather charge the entire industry with the fault of such. The Global Warming Policy Foundation has warned that without some form of carbon capture, and I quote, net zero would see the demise of farming in this country. Agriculture in the United Kingdom employs over 470,000 people according to government statistics. DERA statistics in Northern Ireland demonstrate that agri-food as a sector, it composes 1/3 of our total manufacturing output and provides jobs for 113,000 people and contributes 5 billion to our economy. So let me ask you, ought we to sacrifice the industry of hard-working and honest people on the altar of net zero extremism?
On that point?
Yes.
Could you not change the industry to hydroponics, which would involve a similar amount of people being employed?
I'm not confident enough on the topic to give information on that. There is viable alternatives to net zero that are economically viable. An excellent paper by the CFBS with the author Sir John Redwood detailed how we must revise our energy policies to better our economy.
On that point,
of course.
You previously cited people like John Clark who work for big oil companies and car companies that require the facilitation of those kinds of things. Do you not think they're just saying this because they've got financial incentives that we actually need this?
No, I didn't mention John Clark, but John Redwood has quite clearly laid out his desire to protect the natural environment, but also on a basis that ensures economic sanity is retained within proposals. Such could be seen in the need to divert our attention to the creation of new storage technology. I'm not sure where all these renewables are going to be stored and the energy of which is going to be stored that they produce. We need to find solutions that can store the energy on a long-term basis, which we currently don't have, so perhaps investment into that area of technology. We ought to expand nuclear power generation by commissioning smaller prefabricated batch-produced nuclear stations. We could ensure and prioritise food security, which is well put at risk, and as well as prioritising the farming and fishing industries. We also must decarbonise electricity before we even think about installing heat pumps. It's simply not viable. It would be utterly imprudent, and net zero annihilates economic rationality. However, what we can do is learn from the great legacy put out by Margaret Thatcher in pursuing green policies. And on the point of Thatcher, I would like to move on to the late Lord Lawson, who put it so very aptly when he asked, and I quote, "How great a sacrifice is it right to ask the people of this generation and the next to make? The UK contributes only 0.95% to global greenhouse emissions. The economic ramifications of this presumptuous move towards net zero are utterly dire. The levies and the taxes and the burdens will hit the working people of this country more than any other, I promise you. No, thank you. I suppose on that basis, referring back to Thatcher, in her later years in statecraft in 2002, she referred to global warming not merely as environmentalism, but as a front for global socialism. And in the interest of both humanitarian and economic sanity, I thus believe that net zero is not worth the cost. It would be utterly destructive and detrimental for this country.
Ladies, gentlemen, everything in between, $9.2 trillion. That is how much we will have to spend as a world annually in order to fund for net zero by 2050. And that is considering every country. We can't just consider the UK. This is net zero, not just net zero in the UK. And the thing about this cost is that this is only considering the initial cost. It's not like we put all of this money in and then after the money comes in, Greta Thunberg claws her way out of the sky and brings a monsoon to fund the windmills of austerity and summons a blazing sun to fire up the solar powers of poverty. No, this money, the net zero policies that we will be enacting, they will make us money back. You brought up the statistic of the money that of the $3 trillion, but if we cover the cost that we'll make back from it, it's actually only 200 billion, and that's 0.2% of the UK's GDP, and that's only considering the UK. This is a tiny portion of the population. The thing about this is that net zero is not a cost for our treatment of the environment. It is an investment in our future. It will be the building blocks of a better tomorrow. Now, I'm going to break this down into multiple different parts. First, we're going to start with energy. You brought up some fantastic points about energy, specifically about the storing thing, and you brought up a fantastic point about nuclear, which is on our side. We need nuclear power to go towards net zero. Nuclear power is going to generate a ton of power. It's going to allow us to rely on it while we're having to use the admittedly volatile solar and wind power. But one thing about solar and wind power that I would like to highlight is these technologies, these are growing exponentially. Guess how much they thought that we'd be able to generate with wind power by 2020? 20 gigawatts per hour. As a frame of reference, a gigawatt per hour can power one American suburban home. Do you know how much they generate now? 651.
On that point.
Yes?
2 years ago it was released that only 2% of electricity in the UK is brought forward by onshore and offshore wind sites, so I repeat that.
Onshore, what was that from?
Research, 2 years ago it was announced on news. I can find the article for it.
You mean the UK where Scotland is entirely powered by wind?
It seems like an invalid response, but...
That's right. But anyway, so continuing on. And here's the thing about all of this stuff, all of these nuclear power stations, we can't just build them up out of nowhere. That's right. But here's the thing, who's going to build them? People are. People are going to be the ones building them. That's going to be a bunch of low-skill labor that doesn't need a college degree that people are going to be able to go into. No. And from this, what this will lead to is this will give a bunch of people job opportunities. I would like to point to no, not right now. I'd like to point to Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, in which he invested in a bunch of public infrastructure projects for America as a means of growing the economy. This gave a bunch of people job opportunities and it stimulated the economy further. It gave them disposable income. It allowed them to spend. It got them out of the depression. And we can use a similar system with infrastructure and electricity projects. Not right now. In order to stimulate our economy further. And speaking of infrastructure, we're going to have to change our infrastructure a lot if we're going to accommodate for net zero. We're not going to have to change it to be worse. We're going to change it to be better. It's going to be so much better. So you brought up electric vehicles, for example. We're not going to use electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are rubbish. We are going to be changing our infrastructure to be more pedestrian-based, not based around cars, because that is a more efficient way. Because we can't rely on electric vehicles. They use resources like lithium that we are going to run out of if we keep building electric vehicles. And as the population grows, that's the same. Yes.
On that point, you're talking about how we need to urbanize. Well, not urbanize, but rely more on pedestrian traffic and public transport. Surely those would be not sufficient for people who, say, live far away from existing bus routes or trains. and the fact that not everyone has like the sort of ability to, sort of take the train to say everywhere, or existing bus routes are not fit for the purpose of it.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Our infrastructure isn't built for this right now, so that's why we need to develop it further to make sure that people in those areas will have means of getting to these to public transport easier. Another thing I'd like to bring up is will be how the net zero policy is going to result in a lot of regulations that's going to benefit us. It's going to like products and buildings are going to have to be designed to be more sustainable, which are going to benefit us. I'd like to point yes.
Obviously, using new materials can put an immense risk in the safety of the structure. And further to that, regarding the building transport, it requires quite a lot of carbon due to certain materials requiring such things.
Sorry, could you please repeat that? I don't understand.
The new materials that you're specifying that we use for sustainability do not properly exist yet in high enough quantity or at a sufficient strength to be able to perform their purpose.
Yeah, the thing is, with those materials, those are currently being worked on right now. My background is I'm doing environmental and civil, and I know that there is a lot of progress being made in these fields that will allow us to depend on them more. But I'd like to point to how a couple of weeks ago there was a problem with concrete buildings in schools in England. They were collapsing because they weren't designed with sustainability in mind. As we're designing new buildings with sustainability in mind, this is going to result in better, longer standing structures that we can rely on more. And yes.
You're talking about buildings that are designed to last long. How do you propose designing a building which will last 24,100 years to store the radioactive plutonium from the nuclear reactors you want to build?
We're not using plutonium, we're using uranium. Anyway, no backup. And there are a bunch of other factors that affect this too. Like my contemporaries will be elaborating on this later, but us being more energy independent from using renewables and nuclear, that's going to allow us to be free from influence of foreign markets and foreign nations, as well as that. It's going to cost us more if we choose to not invest in net zero, which again we'll be elaborating on further. With natural disasters and the like, they're going to be way more expensive to cover than the floods we will experience will be way more expensive than buying a couple solar panels or building a couple wind turbines. So in conclusion, I would just like to say that net zero is not a price that we must pay in order to accommodate for our consumeristic society, as a lot of people seem to frame it. Net zero is an investment in our future, a better and brighter tomorrow. Thank you.
What has the climate ever done for us? For thousands of years, at every turn, it has tried to kill us, humans. And now we're expected to roll over and satisfy it because we're warming up the planet too much? Now, obviously, this is an outrageous argument to make. But it's almost as outrageous as what the companies do in using net zero to hide how much they're actually damaging the planet. Net zero is not some noble goal to work towards, as the opposition will argue. Net zero obscures the truth of what is happening to the environment and stops rather than encourages action. It's a deeply flawed concept, net zero. There's no sort of agreed upon way to measure net zero. We don't have a unified framework for saying this is what is being put out, this is what net zero is. It's ultimately a tool of the propaganda of corporations in order to greenwash their operations. There are millions, well maybe not millions, but thousands of loopholes of ways to get around the sort of tricky framework of net zero. 85% of carbon credits did nothing. 85% of the credits that companies used to promote their activities as net zero did not have any positive impact on the environment. Yes?
Essentially, you're completely negating the fact, though, that there's no active regulation at the moment for carbon credits. As this continues on, there will have to be more regulation, a regulatory body to measure this and essentially
but
negate your point.
no, because what we're talking about is working towards net zero now. Achieving net zero as things are is ultimately a futile endeavour because net zero is not really actually a thing, it's not sort of closely defined. If there was a definition, an agreed upon framework, a way of working towards it clearly, then no thank you, then perhaps it would work a little better. Let's talk about some projects around net zero. First of all, most net zero projects that people use to offset their carbon were already happening before, and it's just sort of a way of earning a little extra money to sell them as carbon offsetting.
On that
No, thank you. Afforestation, it doesn't work. Trees take 10s, 20s of years in order to get to the point where they're actually taking in more carbon than they put out. It depends on the species of tree. Generally, it's estimated that a tree planted now would have to be around until at least 2050 to make any sort of meaningful impact. No, thank you. In Cambodia, 42% of newly reforested areas were deforested within about 5 years of being forested through logging and such. And these were areas specifically reforested under sort of carbon neutrality programs.
On that point.
No, thank you. Now let me talk about carbon capture and storage. This one is particularly fun. Carbon capture and storage is really sort of stupid when you look into it. It's what a lot of companies use to say they're working towards net zero or they are carbon neutral. It's what they say carbon neutrality is. We're taking carbon out of the environment. Great, good for you. Where's the energy coming to take the carbon out of the environment? That's an issue. And you might say, well, they can use renewables. But there are much better uses for renewables. Carbon is still being used to power data centers, computer centers, things like this. Renewables would be far better suited to providing energy for these sorts of facilities than for sort of futile efforts of carbon capture and storage. Yeah, go ahead.
Regarding the data centres that require current baseline load, we're suggest using renewable energy, which is, as we know, quite variable, but not put at risk today.
Renewable can be sort of moderated through things that you know about, like pumped storage, hydroelectric, so that's not necessarily a brilliant point. Sorry. 90% of carbon capture and storage ultimately fails. I want to talk to you about the California Canyon gas leak, in which carbon capture and storage has been going on for some time. Now, carbon capture and storage, just to sort of explain it a bit, you take the carbon out of the atmosphere with basically some large fans, you pump it underground and you store it there. Problem is, quite often it leaks. California Canyon, 97,000 tons of methane emitted in the air. So all the energy that went into putting that methane underground was wasted, essentially, because it's back in the atmosphere. No, thank you. Ultimately, carbon capture and storage is just a tool of companies like Google, Shell, and IAG. IAG is a group of airlines. So 3 companies that definitely are very sort of climately conscious and aren't trying to greenwash their operations in the slightest.
On that point?
Fine.
Okay, I feel, so you're bringing up carbon capture, but I agree, carbon capture is a lot of rubbish, but that's, the thing is, we never really brought it up, like, I feel as though...
No, you didn't...
So, let me finish. I feel like, our sort of plan that we outlined was, we're going to use renewables and then nuclear as a backup due to the volatility of
I'll
renewables.
get to...
Can you cover that? As
I will be
like,
covering that in just a second. Let me explain. Currently, net zero is mostly... a lot of net zero is... right now, a lot of net zero is projects like carbon capture and storage, which is why I've talked about it. It would make sense for your side not to talk about it, because it makes net zero look fairly bad, to be honest. But to get on to your point, let me talk about carbon trading internationally. Now, the argument presented by Keir here focused quite a lot on the UK, but for net zero to be achieved, it has to be a global thing, right? No point just the UK, which produces about 0.7% of the world's carbon emissions, going net zero, because it would do nothing. No, there is no standardization, there is no integrity, there is no transparency in the carbon credit trading system globally. It is essentially environmental colonialism. It allows the blame to be shifted from rich first world countries to poorer countries. Listen, India is often attacked over its high carbon emissions. It's industrializing. It produces a lot. India produces 1.9 tons of CO2 per capita. The USA produces 15 tons per capita, but the USA can trade at least some of that away to poor countries. And that puts the onus on them to sort it out. That's not all right. Developing countries did not have the opportunity that the West had in using carbon to rapidly industrialize and increase their living standards. Are we going to stand here and tell the developing countries not to use carbon and to pursue net zero at the forsaking of their own living standards? Net zero is simple. It's deceptively simple. It allows firms to hide, and it allows firms to avoid reducing their emissions and facing up to their problems.
Okay, yeah, there we go. We got it. Got it.
So I'd like to preface this by saying that I will be talking about the geopolitical angle of achieving net zero, and I will be glossing over a lot of the humanitarian aspects of this in terms of that, rather talking about the geopolitical struggles the world will face following a failure to achieve net zero by 2050, by 2100. And this is mainly because my colleague later on in the debate will then talk about this in greater depth. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is regional instability. So, as we have already seen in the last 20 years or so, there has been an increasing number of droughts and weather front activity, which has completely devastated entire regions of the global south and many other kind of places which are incredibly vulnerable to these incidents. And the result of this is, there's many results of this, one of which is increasing radicalization in these countries and increasing instability in them due to conflicts. This can be shown in a study done by 2015 showing in 2011 Syrian uprising, one of the factors for this was a drought in the Fertile Crescent. This exacerbated conflicts in the region and was one of the reasons for the outbreak of violence there. As well as this, ISIS recruitment was shown to be highest in areas of massive droughts, caused by, in part, by weather conditions caused by global warming. As well as this, there will be an increase in food and resource scarcity in areas particularly affected by climate-related disasters. This is particularly the case in Africa, and places in Central Africa and the Sahel, where there will be massive amounts of climate migration, massive amounts of regional instability, and the already destabilised nations in Central Africa and places around there will be further crumbled by this continuation of climate trends. So, and we'll see that as well as this, there will be massive increases in illnesses such as cholera and other endemics due to these incidents. Food scarcity is caused by climate disasters. This will be further exacerbated by mass migration as people are forced to uproot from their homes with a lack of food, a lack of water, and a lack of clean environments to live in. This will bring along massive disease across the continent. The International Organization for Migration then puts 192 million people by 2050 migrating due to climate change. This will potentially could be up to 1.2 billion, with other estimates being 1 to 3 billion by 2070. This will cause a massive decrease in global living standards and generally just completely destroy any semblance of a state or a kind of functioning society in many countries around the world. Even in Europe here, you can see the political instability caused by the 2015 migrant crisis, in which the rise of far-right radical parties sprung up due to this migrant crisis, in part. That was only around 1.4 million immigrants coming from the regions affected by European migration crisis. Imagine now there's 192 million people moving throughout the world and also internally. The instability in every single country around the world that is vulnerable to migration and who are not prepared economically or socially to deal with these migrations. The damage that will cause and the instability will be incalculable if it's already bad enough, if already far-right parties have got such a root in countries where there has not been this kind of mass migration. Let alone, so you can look at Turkey as well, in which, let's say, they were not economically equipped to handle the sort of millions of people coming up through the Middle Eastern regions to do so. And as well, how the majority of these will be internal migration, and this will cause massive destabilisation in many countries where they are particularly vulnerable to these climate issues. However, there is a kind of brighter side to this. A somewhat brighter side is by achieving net zero by 2050, or at least massive collection action on a global scale. Some people will argue, and there have been studies showing that up to 80% of internal migration could be avoided by 2050 if collective action is done. So this shows that not only will the effects from increasingly worse climate around the world be utterly devastating for the majority of people in the world, but that it can be avoided if we achieve global collective action, or at least partially avoided. It is going to happen. It is going to be awful. It is going to be tragic, but it can be mitigated to some extent, and that the cost for that is worth it for achieving net zero. The next section is geopolitically, as my colleague stated, about the benefits of an economic plan or economic self-sufficiency using green energy, is that we will be energy independent. This means that we would not rely upon petrostates around the world for our oil, for our gas, for our energy. Even despite the war in Ukraine, the majority of a large portion of EU exports are still Russian. Imports are still Russian for oil and gas and fossil fuels. This shows that by having energy self-sufficiency, we would avoid effectively funding a conflict in modern day between a fascistic state and another nation. As well as this, the petrostates in the Gulf, we would avoid funding the political elite in those states. I think there is 560 million euros a day is going right into the pockets of the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, and this must be stopped. I hope this, and in doing so, and by achieving net zero by 2050 or 2100, this would eliminate the funding for these kind of states.
Please take the pumpkin off. No. It's a slightly better version of Artemis Fowl.
I'm speaking for at least the first three members of the proposition when I say that we're not denying climate change is real and that environmental sustainability is a pressing issue that we need to acknowledge. But what everyone in the House needs to acknowledge tonight is that we cannot sacrifice everything. We need to approach this issue with a discerning eye. We need to recognize that there are costs to achieving net zero. There are costs to limiting our emissions. And some people would like to blindly lead you to believe that there's one path to go down to achieve success. We need to recognize that there's a financial cost, a cost which can cripple small businesses. It can cripple the poorest among us. It could cripple your local chipper when the government decides to overreach and enforce regulation which will force them to lay off their employees. The poorest of our society are the ones who will be paying the cost for pollution.
We're being asked to make investments, to use our taxpayer money to pay for carbon capture, alternative energy, and there are very few examples of mass success.
On that point.
Go ahead.
So do you not think it's worse that if, say we don't do carbon capture, the Earth heats up obviously? Currently the iceberg, it's like called the Doomsday Iceberg, is currently melting now. See New Orleans basically underwater and Venice gone. It's going to raise sea levels by 17 feet. Do you not think that...
They shouldn't have built their towns by the sea. We need to acknowledge that there's such a potential for joblessness and for economic plundering. We cannot sell ourselves down the river. This is politically acceptable social inequality, and we cannot allow it to come. We cannot stand idly by and allow politicians who are looking for a quick soundbite to sell our souls. We need to exercise prudence. We need to be balanced and pragmatic. Net zero's lofty targets are not that. They are not what we need. Net zero is a much maligned political buzzword. It targets people, not polluters. It's profit before people, and it's doubling down on what was already stupid.
On that point?
Yes.
You're talking about how there's so many alternatives to net zero, but equally by taking those alternate pathways, are we not fulfilling the goals of net zero by reducing our carbon emissions down
Net
to
zero,
point?
net zero isn't just about reducing our carbon emissions. By definition, net zero is equalizing our carbon emissions with any sort of thing to offset that. That is, as Jonathan mentioned, carbon credits, which is just a massive geopolitical pyramid scheme. That's not acceptable. We can take steps for environmental sustainability, but it should not be this. This is just a glorified poor tax. Let's look at the ultra-low emission zone. That has people paying the cost. Car companies are just making more money when I have to sell my 2008 Honda Accord because I can no longer drive it to and from home and work. I have to go out and buy a new Tesla with a lithium battery, which kids have mined for.
On that point?
No.
On that point.
No. However well-intentioned, we are making a mistake. This will strain our budget, it will distract from the immediate pressing concerns of the ordinary people among us. It will overshadow scientific studies which disagree with how effective net zero will be. The poorer countries, the ones that we colonized, cannot bear this economic burden, and yet we're demanding that every nation in the world adhere to this stupid concept. We cannot inflict this upon them. It's unfair that the greatest contributors now seek to lecture us on the cost of their environmental impact and how we now need to shift to a radical new strategy that there's no evidence will work. That's what the opposition are doing. That's why you need to side with the proposition tonight, because they are lying to you. I don't disagree with championing, that's a weird word, thank you, environmental ideals. But that's not what this is. It's an unfair, forced, unnecessary burden to be placed on those who are already vulnerable in our communities, those who are already suffering.
On that point?
No. You must vote with the proposition to acknowledge that net zero is not a workable concept. We cannot embrace this. We cannot let an abstract, nonsensical thing infiltrate our lives. We are simply asking to be thrown over a blind hill crest.
On that point.
It's being suggested that we will reach a promised horizon, when in reality we are throwing ourselves off an economic cliff into a foggy ocean. We have no idea what awaits us. Our society will suffer.
On that point.
Yeah.
You talk about cost in a very rhetorical sense, very narrowly focused on economic terms. Is there not a moral cost to ignoring the goal of net zero, which is the ultimate devastation?
The values of net zero are fantastic. The values of net zero are, let's all live in a happy land with no emissions. But that path to get there, the concept of net zero, isn't practical. It doesn't work, and it's only going to make things worse in the short term. If we make things worse in the short term, if ordinary people can no longer agree with environmental discipline, then they will no longer have support. What you will get is democratically elected governments who will not support such environmental concepts. Because you will get a radicalized population, a radicalized voter base, who will simply seek to find the easiest way out, and they are going to just lead to more and more pollution. If, as the opposition has said, this will lead to geopolitical struggles, then maybe we should point out that these countries are already in geopolitical struggle. Because what we're doing is talking down to them, as we have done for hundreds of years, saying, you need to do this, you need to do that. What they're doing right now is industrialization. What they're doing is catching up. They are making their own industry so that they can operate on a standard economic playing field. That's what we need. Is that protected time or finished? What we need to do is realize that net zero is not an achievable solution. It's a pathway, but it's the wrong one. We have different roads we can choose, and the opposition tonight would like you to believe that the concept of net zero is the only pathway that can lead us to success. It's not. It is already shown to be flawed. We're not denying that there is climate change, apart from Luke. We are not denying that there will be a cost to our actions. But what we're suggesting is that net zero, if we continue down this path, will ultimately just put us in financial ruin. It will put us in a state where we can no longer take the initiative to achieve environmental sustainability. Net zero is just a stupid, fancy buzzword. It's what Sulla Braverman will go on TV and passingly mention while she's busy paying for flights to Rwanda. You need to recognize the government do not know what they're doing, and you need to think outside the box. That is the only way we can solve this. Thank you.
Michael McKay up as third opposition.
So, the proposition has complained a lot about nuclear waste, about how we're in the store for so long, what we do with all this waste. We can do a lot with it, and that's what this speech is going to be about. What do you think of when you consider nuclear energy? Many of you will consider the destructive effects witnessed in the past. For example, Chernobyl or Hiroshima. Nuclear energy is surrounded by a blanket of fear, which is, of course, only natural. In the past, we feared fire due to the immense destructive capability, but only by harvesting it have we developed the comforts of modern life. Similarly, nuclear energy can cause great destruction, but by controlling it, we can gain access to power on a scale we've never seen before. I know what you're probably thinking. No matter how much we gain from the technology, the risk of a meltdown or fallout will always be too dangerous to consider the technology. But what if I told you that nuclear energy is not only the safest form of energy, it's not only safe, but it's the safest form of energy. Even rooftop solar causes nearly 5 times more death than nuclear for the same number of homes powered. These figures contain deaths from infamous nuclear incidents such as Chernobyl, when vital safety systems were turned off during risky experiments. After these incidents, there was a large focus put on increasing the safety, and due to this, there are now extremely stringent procedures and safety mechanisms to prevent this from ever happening again. With the new...
Solar is more safe than nuclear energy. That's been proven.
Sorry, what was your question?
Solar is more safe than nuclear energy in terms of death.
In regards to most of these deaths were people falling off roofs and stuff. No, I have checked, and solar is 5 times more deaths per megawatt hour of energy produced. Obviously, it's the case where nuclear and solar take different shares. So, nuclear waste is viewed as a major problem today by the proposition. Luckily, as nuclear fuel is so energy dense, we don't actually produce that much nuclear waste. On average, each person will only produce less than a drop of waste per year for all the energy needs for the entire year. But we can still improve. Today's reactors only operate around about 5% efficiency, which means that most of the fuel ends up as waste, but future reactors can work at 95% efficiency.
On that point?
Yes.
You're celebrating listening argues the harms of these emissions.
Yes.
Surely, therefore, we should aim for a measure that stops the emissions in the first place instead of net zero, which inherently accepts them as inevitable and tries to cancel them out. Like you're basically accepting they're inevitable as opposed to what you're arguing they're horrible instead of just a measure that stops them.
Well, actually, we don't argue from that point. We want net zero, and that can either be achieved by putting out zero emissions, or that can be achieved by balancing it with something like carbon capture and storage, which has been brought, but I'll get to that later. So, the own plants operate at 5% efficiency. They're the ones we're currently using now, which are more than enough to supply our energy needs in countries like France. But we can get them working up to 95% efficiency. Because of this, it's a monumental advantage, which doesn't mean we get 19 times more energy from the same amount of fuel, but it also means that the nuclear waste of today can be the nuclear fuel of tomorrow. Believe it or not, nuclear power plants aren't the only producers of nuclear waste on the energy grids. Fossil fuels, which several members of the proposition will support, naturally contain radioactive elements. When coal is burnt, all these radioactive impurities are left behind in the ash, which is then casually disposed of. When nuclear waste is produced, it is carefully sealed using meters of concrete or water to prevent radiation from leaking out, while on the other hand, coal gas has even been sprayed on roads by 9 US states. Due to this, coal power plants carry 100 times more radiation into the surrounding environment than nuclear. I'll take your
The United States, which has the most nuclear reactors of any country in the world, has recently been shipping its nuclear waste to an underground bunker in Nevada. However, 2/3 of Americans and 83% of those in Nevada believe that they should not have this in their state. Are you of the belief that you should impose a dangerous substance being stored on the ground of citizens who don't want it?
I believe it's one of them things where there's a lot of NIMBYism. Nobody wants the nuclear waste storage facility to be in their area, but people want the nuclear waste storage facility to be somewhere. So, up until now, all of our nuclear fuel has been mined, and this has been brought up. But recently, the Department of Energy in America has now made extracting uranium from seawater not only possible, but economical. We can harvest 100 trillion tons of uranium from the oceans, which is enough to power 100% of all today's energy needs for the next 1 billion years. As we remove uranium from the oceans, more is dissolved into the rocks, renewing the supply. Due to this technology, nuclear is now a renewable resource, as the fuel is naturally renewed within one human lifetime. This research has only been done on uranium, but it has also fueled further studies, and if we were to scale this up and apply it to other fields, if we could mine other things from the oceans, uranium is a very low concentration in the Earth's crust, but other materials like lithium have much higher abundances. If we can mine from the seabed using the same technologies that we're using for uranium, but now applied to lithium, we could effectively strip mine an area that is like twice the size of all the land on Earth without doing any environmental degradation, and the oceans will do our work for us.
On that point?
I'll do that.
So I don't think we really disagree with nuclear energy. I just don't see how nuclear energy being good necessarily means that achieving zero is worth the cost.
Is that protected time? So what was your question again? Yes, sorry.
You've talked a lot about nuclear energy,
Yes.
which I would agree is pretty cool. But how does having more nuclear energy necessarily mean that achieving net zero is worth the cost of?
Yes, nuclear energy is very cool and we're scaling up, but it means that this is a viable alternative to fossil fuels that we can actually use in the grids. Nuclear energy has been shunned in the past, but now we're recognising it for the fantastic tool that it actually is. And now it means that it is a feasible option that we wouldn't have had in previous years, especially with new technologies. So I'm going to take a quote by JFK. Ouch for being shot. Oh, sorry, wrong one. We choose to reach net zero. We choose to reach net zero in this decade and do the other things. Not because they're easy, but because they're hard. Because they only serve to organise and measure the best energies and skills. Because the challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one that we're unwilling to postpone, and in which case we can't postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too. I believe the investment in research in regard to the net zero will have massive applications to other fields. NASA, which is all about space, the technologies from it have still generated $8 worth of value for every $1 put in. This is a fantastic return on investment which beats the S&P 500. If we take the brightest minds that are normally working in academia and put them to work in net zero, we get fantastic technologies that will help us in other areas. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Michael, and I'd like to welcome Luke McGuire to Next slide.
Hey.
has no pronouns, you can't refer to him.
By unpopular demand, I am back. Now, I'm not going to stand here and give you some sort of fact-based argument that our well-meaning liberal friends attempted to do. And isn't that they're wrong now? It isn't that they're wrong. They just know so much that just isn't so. Now, I'm not trying to change their minds. I know I won't change my mind, regardless of the facts set before me. I'm dug in. I will never change. I'm going to show you why you shouldn't. Because science is a liar sometimes. The level of bias shown within given data sets is clear to be seen, as our dear first speaker did point out. The contradictory scientific claims on the climate front is so wild. How could you trust them? How could you trust
that point?
Lord, no. First it was global warming, then it was global cooling, now they've dubbed it climate change. No, now they've dubbed it climate change, so that when eventually they get their wee data set wrong and the bias has been shown, that they can say, oh no, we didn't mean it, it's the general term, they were just, this wee set was just wrong here. We weren't lying the whole time. But listen, I'm not saying that climate change isn't happening. What I am saying is that net zero is the political angle of climate change. They use the boogeyman of this genuine good cause that we should work towards ameliorating the causes of climate change. All they care about is one thing, and one thing only: power. They care about power, coercion, money, and manufacturing consent. They are all globalists. The first opposition speaker started his entire debate saying there must be a global response to this net zero stuff.
On that point,
no. And this shows so clearly why we detest you. According again to our dear first speaker, who spoke so wonderfully, he quoted, and this is the only time I'm ever going to say this sentence, the great Margaret Thatcher. These are no more than global communists. They're idealists. They want daddy government to look after you. They don't actually care about climate change. As our dear second proposition speakers made so clearly, this is just a boogeyman to make you all fear this thing that may happen.
On that point.
Haven't denied it yet. Haven't denied it. No, it may happen. They're fear mongers.
On that point.
No. Overdo. Net zero is an excuse to impose regulations on people. These politicians and the opposition do not believe a word they're saying. They're all lying to you. All they want, like I said before, is motivations when it comes to the political entity. I'm not talking about climate change, I'm talking about net zero, the political arm of climate change.
On that point.
No. I don't want to keep. No, just don't ask them. So, where was I?
Political wave of climate change?
Oh yes, they were. Yes. So, I believe that most of us would believe it's a good thing to care for the poor in society. I regularly stand up for them in these debates. So let's take a brilliant example of that proposition third speaker brought up was the ULEZ zone, which I believe it's £12–13 a day that the rich could easily afford or buy a new car and not have to pay it, or the poor have to pay it no matter what because they can't afford to get a new car. So what does that make it? No, what does that make it? It makes it a form of taxation, and it makes a form of unfair theft.
Is this no bargain speaking?
And opposition third admits that climate change is the great boogeyman that I have been saying that they are using it as. I'm not saying it's not real, I'm saying it's being misused. I'm saying that the data sets they're using are inherently biased because they are fact-finding missions, they are evidence-seeking, they are immoral. It's bringing me to our dear fourth. I was in the speaker. I can't believe I managed to get something on you and you haven't spoke yet. You give a POI and you talk about the moral context, the moral issues when it came to net zero. And I completely agree. This is what I take most heed with. So it is, what does it profit a man to be born if he suffers the loss of liberty? Those in Westminster, those in Davos, those across the world that want to rule us all, they want to have you so terrified, watching the BBC, watching Fox, whatever it is, talking about climate change. They're manufacturing consent so that you will support their tyrannical regime, because if they do it bit by bit, you won't realise you don't have any freedoms left. And everybody knows I love democracy. I love the Senate room. I love freedom, I love justice, I love equality. So, what I would say, because I'm trying to convince you, not these, I'm trying to convince you people here, you are free right now, but what will you do with that freedom? Lying in your pod, your government mandated pod, eating your government ration bugs, about 60 years from now, would you not give every day from now till then that you could have one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives by threat of violence, but they will never take our freedom. Vote for freedom, vote for the proposition, vote for us.
Well, how does anyone follow up the Luke Maguire comeback tour? Well, I'm here to tell you all that be the bearer of bad news. Given the rapid onset of climate change, in fact, it may well be the Luke Maguire farewell tour. Anyway, I have to say, Luke made some incredible insights on all four speakers in the opposition tonight. And I must say, I am going to say something which he will probably be very satisfied to hear. I don't actually believe a word I'm going to say here this evening, because I am speaking a side of the debate that I do not necessarily agree with. However, I'm going to do it with conviction. And also, I am going to say that the theme of my speech will be a global one. So I am indeed a globalist. So, in drawing the opposition's arguments to a close this evening, I want to go back to the principles of the motion itself. The concept of achieving net zero emissions and why it is worth the cost. One of the problems with the proposition's argument is the cost is defined too narrowly in terms of monetary value. In fact, cost has other important dimensions, including the physical cost and devastation that inaction will mean for our planet, our ability to produce food, and even our basic ability to live in stable conditions. I also want to clarify that too much of the discourse around climate change and net zero is framed as a far off, distant future where we have time and the ability to take another course. It is not so. This misunderstands the urgency of addressing the impacts of climate change simply because we do not have the luxury of not being so directly impacted by it. But I put to you that not only are we seeing the more unpredictable weather patterns, as anyone who lives down in South Armagh can attest to over these last weeks, but I put to you that you only need to ask the poor farmers of the Loire Valley in France, or anyone caught up in their holiday in Rhodes in Greece, about where raging wildfires stranded people and meant that an emergency evacuation had to take place. That climate change is a very real experience on Europe's doorstep. Firstly, let's clarify what achieving net zero actually means. Net zero refers to the balance between the greenhouse gases we emit into the atmosphere and those we remove or offset. The primary greenhouse gas in focus is carbon dioxide, the main contributor to global warming and climate change. As we grapple with the environmental challenges posed by climate change, achieving net zero is not merely an option, it's a moral obligation. One of the most compelling reasons for pursuing net zero is the environmental imperative. Our planet is experiencing the adverse effects of climate change, including more frequent and severe weather events, rising sea levels, and disruption to ecosystems. I live right in the banks of Strangford Lough. I'll be underwater soon. These changes pose significant risks to food security, water resources, and human livelihoods. By achieving net zero, we aim to slow down and eventually halt the increase in greenhouse gas emissions. We accept them as a reality of the system, because if you take the link between human action, the excesses of human industrial production, and all the things that come with it, yes, industrialisation has been of untold benefit to us, even powering this room right now. However, we have to admit that for too long, we ignored what was right under our noses.
On that point.
No, thank you. By achieving net zero, we aim to slow down and eventually halt the increase in greenhouse gas emissions, offering our planet a chance to heal and recover. In light of the climate crisis, we must also acknowledge the cost of inaction, not purely in monetary terms, but in physical cost. The consequences of failing to achieve net zero are staggering. More severe natural disasters, agriculture and water supply disruptions, and the displacement of millions of people due to rising sea levels are some of the harsh realities we face. The cost of inaction will far surpass the investments required to transition to a more sustainable future. Achieving net zero is not an expense, it's an investment in the survival of our planet and the well-being of future generations. But the advantages of striving for net zero extend beyond environmental concerns. They also present economic opportunities that we must not overlook. Jack made a very, very good argument for a rather dystopian, economically liberal world where everyone is, I guess, dreaming of Margaret Thatcher. But
they often do.
Yeah, of that I have no doubt. The clean energy sector is one of the fastest growing industries globally, offering a multitude of employment opportunities. By investing in renewable technologies, we can build a more robust and sustainable economy, reduce our dependence on finite fossil fuels, and lessen our vulnerability to volatile energy markets. I don't really want to particularly say this, but by continuing and persevering with our dependence on finite nuclear resources, which are geographically dispersed, it means we're in the pocket of despots like Vladimir Putin whenever it comes to assuring our own energy security. We can only assure our own energy security up to a certain point. We're still volatile to supply shocks and to crisis abroad. Moreover, achieving net zero is a pathway to improve public health. The burning of fossil fuels, a major source of greenhouse gas emissions, is linked to air pollution and associated health problems. Asthma, respiratory diseases and cardiovascular issues are on the rise due to poor air quality. By transitioning to cleaner energy sources and reducing emissions, we can significantly improve air quality, leading to healthier lives and reduced healthcare costs. This is an investment in the well-being of our citizens and a reduction in healthcare expenses that will more than compensate for the initial costs.
On that point.
Yes.
You said earlier that net zero isn't necessarily all about cutting carbon emissions, but rather balancing carbon emissions.
Yes.
So, given that it's about balancing instead of cutting carbon emissions, how will air quality improve?
There is a demonstrable benefit to reducing carbon emissions, and if you offset them, it does mean cleaner air. There are studies that bear this out, and I can refer to them after. Furthermore, the transition to net zero presents a unique opportunity for innovation and technological advancement. When we commit to reducing emissions, we foster the development of new clean technologies that can be exported and shared with the rest of the world, solving the issues of developing countries face. This position can put us at the forefront of the global clean energy market, enhancing our economic competitiveness and global influence. Another vital aspect to consider is the social justice dimension of achieving net zero. Low-income communities often bear the brunt of environmental degradation and the consequences of climate change. By transitioning to a more sustainable, low-carbon future, We can address these disparities and ensure that the benefits of net zero are shared equitably. This is an investment in social justice and a more inclusive and fair society. In conclusion, achieving net zero emissions is not just worth the cost, it is imperative for the well-being of our planet, our economy and our society. The environmental, economic and health benefits, along with the advancements in technology and the promotion of social justice, makes the cost of achieving net zero a sound investment for the future. I've acknowledged the bet. The price of inaction far exceeds any initial expenses we may incur, and the time to act is now. Together, we can ensure a sustainable and prosperous future for ourselves and for generations to come. Thank you.
Like the last 30 seconds of what you heard there now. So we have time for one short round of questions. How these work is I'll ask a question for the proposition, then one person can respond, and then one person from the opposition responds. So do we have a question for the proposition? Here.
So essentially for the entire debate, you've been saying that net zero is not the way to essentially to stop the climate crisis, but however you've been extremely vague as to what the actual solution is. The only thing that I've heard is things like common sense initiatives, basically buzzwords that politicians use all the time instead of actually discussing what needs to be done. So instead of doing what essentially the opposition has proposed in terms of using nuclear energy, what do you actually propose to help the climate? Do you propose just less severe approaches, or just taking longer, or do you want to have a dedicated budget per year to ecological kind of research? What do you actually propose to help the climate?
Proposition response.
I think the key point here is that net zero isn't a framework to help the climate. Net zero proposes nothing to help the climate. In fact, the things that net zero actively encourages that I discussed, like carbon capture and storage, like the essential global pyramid scheme that is the transfer of carbon credits between countries, these don't work. Net zero doesn't work. Net zero isn't a framework to solve the climate problem. It is a vague end goal which has been created so that companies and countries can say that they are doing something, say that they are working towards a goal that in fact doesn't really exist. It's like running towards a rainbow. You'll never get there. No, we agree with things like building more nuclear power plants, investing in greener energy, helping third world countries industrialise in more clean and energy efficient ways, but not under this sort of capitalist corporate, not under this corporate political sort of buzzword that is net zero. Net zero isn't really a thing.
Opposition to respond.
Just in relation to that, so the problem outlines a lot of measures. We don't necessarily disagree with the path that they're saying, but in terms of divesting and diversifying our energy sources, we reject the notion that you don't have a target to aim towards, because without that, all the countries aren't pulling in the same direction. And for some reason, I'm still slightly confused that the plot keeps mentioning this some sort of distinction between you have to remove all carbon emissions for the actual goals of net zero to make sense. It's a complete utter evasion of what net zero is about. It's carbon neutrality. It has significant benefits, untold benefits to health, to our ability to manage the effects of climate change. Because this is about managing something that has been left to fester and left to worsen for far too long.
Okay, and do we have a question for the opposition? I'll go to Finton.
Regarding nuclear reactors, the issue is primarily that given the urgency at which we need to act, the primary nuclear reactor we would be using would be such as small modular reactors. However, the safety for them can't be assured because they're often retrofitted. How does the opposition mean to rectify that?
Yeah, I answered that. Yes, we will be using small modular reactors, which we didn't have in the past, which we couldn't implement in the past. These, you're saying that they're retrofitted. You can retrofit them inside other coal plants, which does decrease cost. And in those scenarios, that might be an advantage And obviously then it might be cheaper to save less on the components rather than the new reactors. But we can also build new systems. There's not consultants for building new systems. And the infrastructure, we've already got civil engineers that are working similar projects. And all, like, we just need to pour concrete, and stuff like that. So it's, building that sort of facility is something we've done a lot. We know how to build concrete facilities, and then we're putting small modular reactors in. Once we get up to like scale, and once we get a production line set up for small modular reactors, we can just install them in these pre-built facilities, so we can scale up extremely quickly. And if the facilities that we're building with concrete, they pass certain safety checks that are already developed, so we can do it far cheaper, and we're still seeing one safety that you would want.
Proposition to respond?
That all sounds pretty great, doesn't it? But the thing is, it's not feasible. And nuclear, despite how many times it's been tried in the past, it's always ended up with flaws. First off, it was us that the reactors weren't safe, there were meltdowns, and secondly, it was that we couldn't store the nuclear waste, and now it's, oh, people don't want nuclear waste in their backyards. And we agree that nuclear should be a part of the solution. Nuclear fusion looks amazing, but we're not there yet. And nuclear fission has immense flaws and is just as threatening to the livelihoods of people as traditional fuel sources. I'm not saying they're good, they're awful. All our fuel sources are awful. Maybe we should move back to before the Industrial Revolution. But what the opposition has ignored is that they are ignoring the point of this debate. We're talking about the cost of net zero. You're standing up and championing it. I can't say that word. The cost is people's livelihoods, it's people's opinion, and the fact is that unless you're going to acknowledge that people disagree with the path to get there, you're simply not going to have enough support for actual environmental measures. Net zero isn't worth the cost in opinions. It isn't worth the cost of the taxpayers' money, which could be used to alleviate suffering right now in the immediate, rather than in 2060 or 2070 or 2080 as the UN keeps kicking the can down the road. At that point, when net zero is actually so-called feasible, it's already too late.
Do we have an abstaining question? Noah?
Given that some of the biggest polluters in the world are places like China, India, or people like Taylor Swift, net zero aside, what are some policies that either side could agree on that would be an alternative or could supplement that other than just nuclear energy?
Proposition to respond.
I'll actually tangent this to an agricultural side, in that it's one of the areas where many governments, especially in the EU and somewhat in Britain, have actually made an impact in reducing that specific emission sector. There are new schemes, especially in the EU. There's a common agricultural policy. There are now grants for farmers to plant trees on their farms and everything, and there are ways of making that more sustainable. That is an example of a success in environmental policy. And I think that's something which can be replicated, but unfortunately what's happening is that people see this and go, ooh, farmer bad, we're making them better through legislation, let's do that for everything. So I think generally, yes, there can be a need for legislation. It has worked in the past, but they need to tread really, really carefully about what they legislate as when. Because with agriculture, there was such a risk that someone could get into government and just sound an outlandish policy which all of a sudden would cause a famine. And that's a real risk in third world countries, especially if you have developed nations inflicting these on third world countries, this obscure standard which, China and India, they are the big emitters. We shouldn't be inflicting this on third world countries, and I hope the opposition agree.
Opposition to respond.
Right, so there's a couple of things. So China and India, the biggest problem with them, as has been outlined by, I think it was you who outlined the per capita thing. The biggest problem with India and China is a population problem. They emit a lot because of how large their population is. What will happen is, as we adopt more environmentally friendly practices, like more environmentally friendly energy options, like it won't just be nuclear, like we're going to have other means like hydroelectric, wind, solar, like these are going to be, like nuclear is meant to be the fallback in case the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. But another big thing is interconnector cables, which allow us to transfer energy between countries, which can help us power these countries. And that doesn't just apply to India and China, it can apply to third world countries too that might need power, but might not have the means currently of producing it in an eco-friendly way.
Brilliant. And now we'll move on to our vote on speaker ability. Now, this is not which side you agree with, this is which side you thought made the best and most convincing argument. So if you believe that was the proposition tonight, please raise your hand now.
Very modest for the 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 14, 15, 18,
I'm done. You got 28. And if you think that the opposition spoke best tonight, please raise your hand now. I got 12.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
I got 12. And if you'd like to abstain on the motion, please raise your hand now.
1, 2,
3, 4, 5. Oh. And Mr. Secretary, could you please read the vote on speaker ability?
Yes, there are 28 votes for the proposition, 12 votes for the opposition, and 6 abstention votes, which means that our turnout has gone down since the start of the night. The opposition is 1.
Well done to the proposition. Next week's debate is this House will elect a Sinn Féin government down in Dublin in Trinity University. So please do come and sign up for that.
Trinity College Dublin.
Okay.
And anybody that's interested in the UCD please come here.
That was a swear word. That was a swear word, young man.
UCD first.